Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to decode a topic that is absolutely crucial, not just for your exams, but for understanding the future of technology and global power. We're talking about rare earth elements, the minerals that basically run our modern world. And yeah, they've become a huge flashpoint in geopolitics. So let's just jump right in with the most obvious question. Are rare earths actually rare? The answer might just surprise you. And it's really the key to unlocking this whole strategic game that's being played out on the world stage. Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. We're going to walk through 5 main sections. We'll start with the absolute basics and build our way all the way up to the key takeaways you'll definitely want to remember. All right, let's kick things off at the very beginning. What in the world are these elements that are causing so much global tension? What makes them so special anyway? Well, to put it simply, rare earths are a group of 17 very specific metallic elements. And that number, 17, yeah, that's a good one to lock in your memory. What makes them so valuable are their really unique properties, things like incredible conductivity and amazing heat resistance. So the really critical point is where they're used, and the answer is pretty much everywhere. We're talking about the smartphone in your pocket, MRI scanners in hospitals, all the way to green tech like wind turbines and electric cars. But their most vital role, their secret sauce, especially for strategic sectors, is in creating these incredibly powerful yet super lightweight magnets, the kind that are absolutely essential for everything from fighter jets to the little motors that run the power windows in your car. Okay, and this is where things get really interesting, because we're going to debunk this whole rare idea. Get this, these elements are not geologically rare, not at all. Take cerium, for example. It's one of the 17. It's actually more common in the Earth's crust than metals we think of all the time, like gold or silver. So that leads to the obvious question, right? If they aren't actually rare, why on earth do we call them that? Well, the answer has nothing to do with geology. Nope. It's all about the economics of getting them out of the ground and, more importantly, who controls the entire supply chain. And here are the 2 big reasons for that rare tag. First, concentration. See, these elements aren't found in big, chunky deposits like gold. They're spread out all over the place, which makes extraction super difficult and expensive. But the real problem is processing. It's a nasty, complicated business. And that brings us to the second point, control. One country, China, has strategically mastered this tough, dirty process, giving it a near total monopoly on refining. We're talking over 90% of the complex processing. Okay, so let's zoom in on that second point, China's dominance. It wasn't some kind of accident. I mean, how on earth did one country manage to get such an iron grip on this incredibly critical market? This one quote from the architect of modern China, Deng Xiaoping, it says it all, really. Way back in 1987, China's leadership knew what they had. They didn't just see rare earths as a commodity. They saw them as a strategic asset, on the same level as oil is for the Middle East. So you see, this wasn't some happy accident. This was a calculated, decades-long industrial policy. It started with Deng's statement in '87, then they invested a ton of money. They mastered the technology, and by the 2010s, they were not afraid to use their dominance as a trade weapon. It's really a masterclass in long-term strategic thinking. And for everyone studying for exams, here's a fantastic little mnemonic for you. To remember where China's leverage is strongest, which is with the scarcer, heavy REs, just think tough diplomacy. Tough for terbium and diplomacy for dysprosium. Those are the 2 they often use as a geopolitical leverage. Okay, let's switch gears and look at the numbers, the hard data, to really understand the global picture. Who has the reserves sitting under the ground? And, much more importantly, who's actually pulling them out and producing them? So if you look at the reserves, what's actually in the ground, the picture is pretty spread out. Sure, China has the largest deposit at 44 million tons, but look at Vietnam, Brazil, Russia. They're not far behind. And what's really important for us is that India holds the world's 5th largest reserves at about 6.9 million tons. And this is the really critical part. Reserves are just potential. Production is power. In 2022, China produced 210,000 tons. The next closest country, the US, produced less than a tenth of that. This chart shows you the whole story. Owning the reserves means very little if you can't actually mine and process them. All right, so that brings us to India. We've got the world's 5th largest reserves, so where do we fit into this whole global chess game? Let's take a look at our challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead. Well, this chart paints a pretty clear and, honestly, a pretty stark picture of our dependency. In 2023-24, a massive 75% of our rare earth imports came from China and Hong Kong combined. This puts our most strategic sectors in a really tricky spot, making us vulnerable to any supply disruptions from Beijing. So, what's the situation on the ground here in India? Well, our domestic production, which is led by the state-owned company IREL, is just a tiny fraction of what China produces. And the impact of this imbalance? It's already hitting our fastest-growing sectors, especially EV manufacturing and electronics. So, what's the plan? Well, the government is tackling this dependency with a three-pronged strategy. First up, boost the existing production through IRL. Second, explore completely new frontiers, like auctioning deep-sea blocks for mining in the Andaman Sea. And third, and this is so crucial, build out our own domestic value chain by setting up new rare earth theme parks. All right, let's wrap this up and consolidate everything. These are the absolute key takeaways you need for your revision, the things you'll want to have at your fingertips. First up, the core concepts. Remember, we're talking about 17 metallic elements. The rare label? It isn't about geology. It's about being costly to extract and being geopolitically controlled. This whole vision started with Deng Xiaoping's famous 1987 statement. And for China's key leverage, don't forget armed mnemonic: tough diplomacy. Next, you've got to know the numbers. India has significant reserves at 6.9 million tons. But the real story, the key disparity, is in the production gap. China's massive 210,000 tons versus our tiny 4,200. And that, of course, explains our import dependency, with a whopping 75% of our supply coming from China and Hong Kong. And finally, India's strategic response. The key agency to know is IREL. The new exploration frontier is the Andaman Sea. And that big push to build out the value chain will be centered on new theme parks in Vizag and Bhopal. And all this leaves us with a really big question for the future. The world's dependence on a single supplier for these critical materials is just not sustainable. A global race to diversify the rare earth supply chain is officially on. And how this map gets redrawn is going to be one of the defining geopolitical stories of the next decade. Thanks for joining.